welcome everyone to this webinar on the impact of labor shortages on SMEs, a topic of interest to many of our members, and it sits at the intersection of our work on human capital, SME growth, and supply chains. And I'll introduce our speakers presently and then call on our event partner, Angela Splinter, the CEO of Trucking HR, whom we thank for generously supporting not only this event, but our work in the areas I just mentioned. So our speakers today are panelists. Our first one will be Simon Gaudreault, Chief Economist and Vice President Research at the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, where he researches and conducts lobbying efforts on economic, commercial, political, and social issues affecting SMEs across Canada. I might add that he has extensive experience in municipal issues and is also a national spokesperson for CFIB. Angela Splinter will be our second panelist. She is Chief Executive Officer of Trucking HR Canada, where she is the steward of talent management best practices for the trucking and logistics sector. Trucking HR has, under her leadership, become a national center of excellence where stakeholders in commercial, transportation, public policy, training, and economics work together to help employers meet the growing demands of Canada's freight economy and supply chain networks. Angela has supported a number of programs with evocative names, such as Women with Drive, Top Fleet Employers, and Career Expressway. Our third panelist today will be Stephen Mill, President of Robert Half. Stephen brings 25 years of unrivaled experience and depth of expertise as Canadian President of Executive Search at Robert Half, a market leader in the field of C-level search. Stephen has substantially grew and integrated over his career multiple business lines, both for Robert Half and for Future Step, a division of Korn Ferry, where he was president. And for the past 4 years, Stephen has led the nomination committee and is advisor to the selection committee for Canada's CFO of the Year. An incredible panel, incredibly well-versed panel, and thank you all for being here. I'm now going to turn the event to Angela Splinter for some, our partner again in this event, for some opening remarks. Angela.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you everyone for being here today. We certainly appreciate the C.D. Howe Institute organizing this session, labor shortages and their impact on small, medium-sized enterprises. As we all know, no sector is immune from these labor challenges and shortages. I am honored to sit on the C.D. Howe Institute's Human Capital Policy Council, where we talk a lot about these issues and certainly looking at a lot of those solutions. I also sit on the National Working Group on supply chain. So a lot of these challenges around labor shortages certainly are top of mind. So we know that there's financial impacts and impacts on our economy overall. And we're certainly seeing it within the road transportation sector, which I'm pleased I'll be able to share a little more detail on that with you when we each have our turn here, sharing some insights with you. So as Danielle mentioned, we do have a great panel here with Simon and Stephen. Thank you again for joining us as we dive deeper into what these impacts are having on SMEs. And I hope you all walk away with some insights and useful information. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Angela. And without further ado, we will go to Simon for his remarks. Our panelists have 8 minutes each. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try to go fast. I have a few data points to cover with you. You'll see that some of the following slides have many different data points. I'll try to stick with the main message on each ones, and we can come back on some of the details after that if we have time in the Q&A session. So if we go without diving right into it, if we go on the first slide. I'm going to try here to paint a picture of the general labor market at the moment in Canada, most specifically on the private sector side. So what you have here is a chart showing the main line is the blue line. It's the job vacancy rate that we do calculate at CFIB. We started this tracking a long time ago. As you can see, this chart starts in the early 2000s. And the job vacancy rate, of course, can be defined as the total number of job vacancies that we would have in a business divided by over the total number of positions. And so for businesses in the private sector, in the last quarter of 2023, the job vacancy rate sat at 3.7% according to our data. The black line that you see in the background is the StatScan series. So we closely follow the StatScan series. We usually release a bit before they do. So we expect that their data will follow ours. And as you can see, it has been trending down since 2022 after peaking at 5.4% back in 2021. What this says is that, yes, there's been a bit of an easing of the pressures on the labor market as measured through the vacancy rate. But as we can see on the following slide, it doesn't mean that actually the number of labor shortages has been reduced significantly. Actually, yes, it's going a bit down, but we still had at the end of 2023 a total of more than 500,000 job vacancies in the private sector in Canada. And if you compare this to the pre-pandemic period, let's say, where, for example, in 2019, we were saying, oh, we're at 400,000, it's historical, we haven't seen that before. Well, since then, the situation has worsened even further. And although it's somewhat easing, we're still at historical levels of job vacancies right now in Canada. On the next slide, I wanted to show you also a different data point that we're tracking that gives a bit more granularity, and it's the share of SMEs in our monthly business barometer survey that report having a limit to their sales or their production growth because of labor shortages. So the top chart tracks shortage of skilled labor as a limit, and the bottom chart tracks a shortage of unskilled or semi-skilled labor. Of course, those definitions, skilled labor, semi-skilled labor, they might be different whether you speak to an academic, someone in a certain sector, or a micro business owner, right? What they will define as skilled labor might be different depending on their reality. I would say that for our members, for small business owners, when they think about skilled labor, it's not necessarily someone who has, for example, a university degree. It might be someone who has very specific skills, whether or not they went to school many years. They have a very specific skill that is in demand on the market and hard to find. As you can see here, as of last month, so this chart is up to date as of February, 46% businesses in Canada, of small and medium-sized businesses, were saying they were limited by a shortage of skilled labor. That was still relatively high. And on the other side, with the unskilled or semi-skilled labor, the pressure has eased somewhat. We're at 20% of firms right now being limited, and that has gone down from a high of almost 40% in the past few years. On the next slide, I wanted here to put labor shortages into context when it comes to the different issues that businesses are facing. So last month, in a separate survey, we asked CFIB members, what is your single biggest challenge at the moment? And they could only choose one answer from that list that you're seeing here. So they were forced into really the top challenge that they were seeing for their business. And of course, 20% said the financial situation of our business. We know that it's been a tough few years. It is still a tough economy for a lot of businesses, but labor shortages came up second. 17% of businesses mentioning that they think it's their single biggest challenge at the moment. And if we go on the next slide, we'll see that it's actually the single biggest challenge for certain sectors. So businesses in natural resources, for 33%, a third of them, they were saying labor shortages is our single biggest challenge. In the construction sector, which is a very key sector at the moment with all of our housing challenges, 28% of SMEs last month said this is our top challenge. And you have also professional services and transportation that were some of the sectors most impacted by labor shortages. But I won't elaborate too much on that because Angela and Stephen have so much great information to share just after me. So let's go to the next slide about the impacts of labor shortages. So I thought I would share this because, of course, that's part of the title of our webcast today. And so when it comes to the impact that it has on businesses, there is a variety of them. For a lot of small business owners is, of course, longer work weeks. We've released actually a report last year on this that we've called the 8-day work week. A lot of small business owners are working the equivalent of an additional day after each week because they cannot find suitable employees. Employees themselves work more hours. But there were also some financial impacts on businesses. 27% said they turned down sales or contracts, and 17% said the current contracts were delayed. And we took those last two, and we tried to estimate a global financial impact on businesses in Canada. And if you go on the next slide, you can see here the results from one of our recent research reports. Everything is available, by the way, at cfib.ca/research if you're curious. But here, what you can see is that it totals $38 billion annually for small and medium-sized businesses in Canada in terms of the delayed or postponed or canceled contracts that are due to the fact that they cannot fill all of their positions. If we go to the next slide, in terms of what we currently recommend in terms of policies to address labor shortages, there's a bit of a mix of recommendations here, but recently we've seen the federal government announce potential changes to the international student visas, the work permits for accompanying spouses, and the temporary foreign worker program. We said the government should definitely hold open and public consultations. We at CFIB will have a lot to say about how important those programs might be for certain businesses. We also recommend to introduce a payroll tax holiday for all new hires. So whether it's EI premiums, CPP or QPP, or workers' compensation premiums, we believe that might help dealing with the labor shortages. Introducing a training tax credits that recognizes on-the-job training for SMEs. SMEs do a lot of informal training, not just formal, and that's traditionally been a very hard contribution to assess on the part of SMEs. So how do you recognize all of that informal training that's been given? Making permanent the accelerated capital cost allowance and immediate expensing to support investments in automation. Automation along with the temporary foreign worker program, where some of the most successful solutions that small businesses implemented to address labor shortages, according to one of our past research reports, which is why we recommend it here. And finally, following the recommendations from we released last year a white paper on breaking down barriers to work, and we had a set of recommendations across all ages. For example, for the youth, how do you make sure that they can fully contribute to the workforce? And same for more experienced workers that are semi-retired or even retired. How do you bring them back to the labor market? So I'll stop it there and pass it along to Angela, who will, I think, take a deeper dive and look at one of the key sectors for the economy.
Merci, Simon. Over to you, Angela.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks for that, Simon. And I think this is a good segue when you're talking about those challenges impacting your members. Certainly within trucking and logistics, we're seeing a lot of those similar challenges. So what I started off with on our next slide today is just making sure we're all on the same page in terms of how we're defining small, medium-sized businesses. So this is from ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development. So really we're looking at employers with 99 and fewer employees. So when we talk about trucking and logistics, so on my next slide here, just to really highlight the economic powerhouse that we are. When we talk about supply chain issues and disruptions, it impacts, right? Trucking and logistics is so key to that. What we contribute to our GDP, average 45.2 billion. And we support every key economic sector from agriculture to construction, forestry, manufacturing, retail. We're a part of all of that. And looking at right, this impact, here is a good visual just demonstrating the share of Canada-US trade by mode of transportation. And you can see trucking is dominating there. And even further, when we look at our impact just within Canada, it's higher. It's almost 78% of the total volume of goods moved within Canada are on a truck. So you can see that the industry is really integral to our intermodal transportation network. We connect consumers, we connect businesses and international markets, again, that are vital to Canada's stability and performance. So we move on to the next slide. Here, just looking at the sheer number of small businesses within our sector, we're very large. Obviously, you can look at the number of small businesses that we have. It's fairly significant. So here, the large percentage that have fewer than 5 employees, those with under 10. There's a large number of small, medium-sized businesses within trucking. So when we talk about these labor impacts, labor shortage impacts and challenges, it's impacting a lot of small employers. So if we break it down further, on this next slide here, I'm looking at, if we move the next slide on, just as the occupational snapshot. When we talk about our industry, we talk a lot about our drivers, right? The driver shortage has been front and center through COVID. Certainly, we were front and center there too, as drivers were on the front lines moving essential goods. But here, looking at the size of our sector, we employ close to 743,000 workers. So 43% of those workers are our truck drivers at 316, 130. But that means 57% of the rest of our workforce are all of these other occupations. So we just like to highlight this because it is becoming more of a concern with our employers when we look at the shortages in other occupations. Similar to what Simon had said, what we're seeing with employers and our latest labor market information, this is where this data is coming from, is from Trucking HR Canada's most recent labor market information release. This is the most up-to-date information we've had in years, being able to use the most recent census data, etc. And we compile all of this data, which includes the publicly available sources, so StatsCan, labor force surveys, vacancy surveys, etc. And we balance it with feedback directly from employers. And when we surveyed our employers, for the first time in about a decade, the driver shortage was not the top concern. It was rising input costs, but the driver shortage was still the second concern. So labor shortages are still there. And employers are still saying that finding all of the workers they need remains a challenge. So here, when we say our key occupations, they're all key occupations, but obviously those ones in yellow are just specific to our sector. But all of these other occupations, which are becoming a concern, are the occupations we compete with every other sector. Every sector is competing for similar talent. So if we move on to the next slide, what I dive into here are more of the vacancies within all of these occupations and what we've been seeing over the years, similar to what we heard from Simon. Vacancies have been at peak levels, and certainly, again, truck drivers being most acute and just really causing concern within the industry. But there's other impacts too when we look at these labor challenges. 1 in 4 companies have said that they will have to delay plans to expand their business because they can't hire enough drivers. So when we look at a lot of those small companies, we need them to continue to expand. We need that growth, and we're starting to see some of those challenges. And again, we're hearing from employers that concern around training for these non-driving roles. Drivers, of course, always front and center, but these other roles, especially technicians and mechanics, very specialized roles, heavy duty technicians, that's becoming more of a challenge. And a lot of those frontline other roles, material handlers, shippers and receivers, as well as those office roles. The HR role in particular has been very challenging, I'm sure in every sector, but we've seen it in our sector as HR professionals are just challenged with finding all of the drivers that they need, leading to more stress and concerns within the workplaces. So if we move on to the next slide, now we're looking more at the forecast of our vacancies. So our most recent data showing that on average, employers will be trying to fill 39,100 on average vacant jobs up until 2030. With the vacancies peaking in 2030. So the blue column are the vacancies, the green column, those are the available workers. So even if we were successful in getting all of those available workers to work in our sector, we still have a gap of close to 10,000, even more than 10,000 workers. So these projections, when we're looking at workforce planning, looking at a sustainable and competitive supply chain, these of course are concerning. And I just share some other information here on those small, medium-sized fleets. Just that another way of looking at it is by revenues. And close to half of companies with revenues under $5 million weren't able to find all of those drivers. So what we heard in our surveys, it was an average of 2 unfilled vacancies, with the majority of those being our long-haul truck drivers. So that, of course, is always concerning, with long-haul truck driving being so key. So we just closing off with one slide, just some final observations and impact. So I mentioned that we have our new labor market information that we've released. And while we're highlighting these vacancies, we're highlighting concerns for our employers, at the same time, we've been able to highlight some successes. We have actually been moving the needle at getting more women into our industry. That is just a big accomplishment for us. And Danielle mentioned this evocative name of our program, Women with Drive, but we just celebrated a decade of that program. So being able to move the needle on that has been significant. That's getting more women behind the wheel, but also more women within transportation overall. We're also getting more young people coming into our sector as drivers and within the other roles. So these have been programs we've been very fortunate to have. These government investments through the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program, through the Youth Employment Skills Strategy, the Student Work Placement Program, they've been able to help us in making that impact. So we obviously need those programs to continue, keep supporting us. It's helped us train drivers. It's helped with wage incentives, getting more people to work as we recovered from COVID and continue moving forward. So, right, we saw that the pandemic was a shock to the system of employers, and other factors, right, moving forward may be just as transformative. So as Canada looks to the green economy, we need to be able to assess those changing skills requirements, those changing labor requirements, and our sector is a key part of that. And as we all know, there's also potential for an event that disrupts supply chain and amplifies the need for workers, and we need to be prepared for that. So we will be looking for more of these continued investments. So on that, I will then, we'll obviously have a Q&A a little bit later, and I'll be turning it over to Stephen.
Great. Thank you, Angela. And oh, we got to go back one slide. There we go. Just by way of introduction, Robert Half is a global provider of talent solutions. We've been in business for 75 years, and we've operated in Canada for close to 40 years. We are a national business in Canada, and our focus is more on, I'm going to call it more on the professional level. So I think this is why this complements kind of the overall conversation. In a couple of Angela's slides, you could see that regardless of whether it's drivers or the blue items that were below, there's challenges in really all elements of hiring within this small to mid-sized business. I'm going to draw on information from a very recent survey of over 1,000 managers across Canada with hiring responsibilities. So this would be everything from a manager up to an owner of a business. We do look for companies that have at least 20 employees as part of our data set that we use when we do this. So we're going to look at really 3 different areas: where the shortages exist, what are some of the drivers and challenges for companies and hiring at the professional level, and then kind of what are the shifting priorities as we look a little bit further into the future. And there's a very interesting slide at the end that actually confirms what Angela showed on that 10-year window between what we're dealing with today and what we forecast we'll deal with in 10 years. So you can go to the next slide. In terms of size of organization here, regardless of which you're going to be in, and we use the same sort of criteria that Angela outlined so that we're all on the same page in terms of definition. But right now, you have almost half of small business looking for people. And I mean, that's still a remarkable number. And again, keep in mind, this is all very current information. And it keeps and also supports what Simon was showing, because if we were to look at this a year ago, it was higher. So in some instances, small was in the 50 plus range, 55, mid-size was about the same, and large was actually at the highest. Now, as we look into where we're at, what are they hiring for? New roles, vacated, or freezing hiring and elimination of roles. But here's a very interesting component of this particular slide, is that the decline that Simon showed on his graph is actually in keeping with this. The larger companies may have more hiring for more roles, but that's because there's more of them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're hiring more people. And in fact, the hiring between the small and mid-size versus large is larger. There are more small to mid-sized companies hiring today than large companies. When you read in the news of layoffs, of all of these sort of things, it's very seldom it's the small and the mid-size. It's the big ones who are doing that. And it has impacted the hiring profile, let's say, for a lot. So it's actually a benefit in my mind for small to mid-sized companies that larger firms have sort of paused in many instances. You go to the next slide. Drivers are very similar to what we've heard from Angela and from Simon, is that you've got in most instances, this company growth. And it's actually reducing the ability to grow by having these vacancies. The second part, of course, is addressing skill gaps. And I want to talk about that briefly about in a lot of instances, small to mid-sized businesses tend to hire with less, I'm going to say with less process than a large company. In other words, who do you know? Let's get it done quick referral. They're not really taking the time to vet the market or to really understand what that role may need. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they sometimes turn a blind eye to what they're missing. And we're getting it done as best we can, so we'll just go with that. And all of these things make it very difficult to build around an existing team. So if you are looking for an expertise that doesn't exist within a team that is more full of generalists, it can be more difficult to bring that talent in. So in a lot of instances today, loyalty, family and friends, the quick referral, they tend to get the jobs in small to mid-sized business. And we're feeling that that's something that needs to be addressed. And small to mid-sized businesses need to really embrace more of an approach and an overall policy to how they bring talent inside their companies. They got to make themselves more competitive. Their story has to be more compelling to candidates. There's a number of items that we think are not that difficult for a small business to adapt, and in turn probably attract better talent today. Compensation and turnover, or no, I'm sorry, not compensation, but turnover is another issue as well. In a lot of instances in small business, if someone leaves, they just pile the work onto someone else's plate. And again, this is something that is just commonly done within small, mostly, and I would say even family-run businesses in that sense. So again, that need for expertise sometimes is greater than the person who's doing the role can handle, and then they go to bring someone in, and it's not a very attractive environment to add, let's call it professional talent to. You can go to the next slide. So finding people with required skills, hiring top choices before competitors, these two things are incredibly connected. Right now, if your business is not presenting the right message to the particular type of candidate you're looking for, you will probably get beat out. How does this actually line up against your competitors? Do you have a compelling value proposition for candidates? And I think that when you don't hire a lot, which is what a lot of small to mid-sized businesses experience, they're not hiring often. So when they go to do it, they're not good at it. And in a sense, sometimes that creates a major disadvantage to larger firms who are very skilled at attracting and making a role look, far more interesting than it may even be, because of who they are as a brand, because of their presence in the market. So we believe, again, that in order to be competitive, companies need to really create a good story, have a good understanding of what they're looking for and what it means to a candidate in the market today. The other thing that's become a big issue, of course, is salary expectation. And again, because a lot of small to mid-sized businesses don't hire a lot, they don't invest the time to figure out if they are competitive. It's almost like, well, this is what we used to pay and this is what we're going to pay. And that doesn't really meet the criteria of candidates today. And it's not just salary, it's not just the cash component, it's the overall experience of your candidate, including benefits and culture and all those other pieces, and which goes to the last point, which is defining what your culture is. And again, if you're a small business, it's sometimes hard for you to put your finger on that. And I think that in today's market, where you may have a better opportunity as a small to mid-sized business to attract talent when larger companies are not hiring as much, you need to be able to define these things: your compensation plan, your culture, what it is you're looking for, why you're better than your competition. The whole thing sort of all ties together. And I think that it's something that a lot of small to mid-sized businesses just have not invested a lot of time, energy, or really money into as well. Next slide. When we do talk about unemployment at 5.8 as of March, when we look at the detail behind that, which is really a sub 3% unemployment rate, when you get into these numbers of 3, 2, and 1% unemployment, these are chronically unemployable people in most instances. I'm not sure how we categorize or how we actually create that number, but fundamentally, when you're down this low, you are not able to just draw off a candidate pool. What you have to do, obviously, is look for ways in which you can attract someone who is currently working to come and work for you. This again speaks to the previous slide where you have to have a story, you have to have a proper approach and understanding of your business and what you need, because this pool here that we're looking at with these small, numbers, you're not going to draw anything out of this unemployment pool. It is about actually making your business attractive to someone who has a good job and is currently working. So you can see it goes across all the different areas of professional employment. And then the last slide, again, just to copy what Angela said, this is a global survey that our company conducts in the latter part of 2023, and it was the same thing. It was a one or two, I think they were allowed 2 responses on this particular question, and this was a very large survey. Number 1, attract, retain top talent and succession challenges today. And if you go to number 3, impact of increasing labor, you can see that there's just work and talent, kind of woven through the entire list of risks for 2023. Go into 2032. What's the number 1? Again, it's talent. So again, we're not really making progress in terms of addressing this as a broader issue. And this just kind of supports the points that Angela and Simon were making. So that's the end of the slides. I think now we can field some questions.
For sure. Thank you to our panelists for this really rich array of complementary information on the challenges, the human capital challenges facing small businesses and small businesses in relation to bigger ones. Very, very informative. So we have an opportunity for questions for our audience, of course, to ask questions of our panelists. The Q&A section is on the right panel. And if you don't see it, click the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and there will appear to the right some options for asking questions. I tried it and it works. But while we are waiting for questions, I think, and my handlers here will tell me if I don't see one that is out there, but I have one for the panel. And I think Simon mentioned, the potential difficulty stemming from let's call it a clampdown on certain types of immigration, temporary workers, students, and what are the options there if you can't change or get back to some higher numbers there? Is it automation? Some people mentioned automation, and I'm curious, Angela and Stephen, about the upskilling aspect from the current pool of workers. The training programs, and also long question, I know, but also there seems to be, in our research anyway, we found there are really pools of workers that are under whose skills are just not recognized. They're underutilized. So wondering what the options are, if it's not just to, let's say, increase the number of workers more than we are already. Simon, maybe in order.
Sure. Well, I think if the first thing that I would say is the challenge with labor shortages is so important right now for the economy that I don't believe that we're gonna solve it with a single answer. It's gonna have to come from a mix of solutions, and that's why at CFIB we've put forward policy recommendations that come from different angles, I would say. certainly, solutions like automation, for example, can help businesses. I've mentioned it during my presentation. We've in one of our past research reports, we've small business owners have identified automation as one of the most successful solutions to their labor challenges for those who had tried it. And the problem in the same report that we've identified is that too few businesses tried it. But then it cannot be the only solution, and I think you will always require talent, no matter how much you automate. Increasingly, we realize that it's automation and innovations like AI or robots are only gonna move the talent requirements to a different place, right? And so perhaps a place that is going to be also more interesting for the workers of tomorrow, because we're gonna replace those repetitive jobs and tasks with some that are more perhaps more I would say that workers would prefer a bit more. There are other solutions also that we can work on when it comes to, you've mentioned briefly those labor pools that traditionally have been representing some untapped potential. People that traditionally have been a bit further away from the job market. Like, is there a way to integrate them? For small businesses, sometimes the challenge is it may require some investment on their part. So I think having some support there from certain helpful and streamlined policies could be a good solution. And when it comes also to making sure we address the mismatch of skills and that are being offered right now and what is being required by employers. So we can address the mismatch through our immigration policies, not just the temporary foreign worker program, but our immigration policies, economic immigration, but also our various training programs. So I think those can all be part of the mix of solutions that I was mentioning. We don't necessarily believe in a silver bullet here.
No silver bullet, yeah, but very interesting. Angela? Angela, you're on mute, I think.
I can just be quick on some of the questions and points you've raised, Daniel. I also see some other questions popping up in the chat, but automation, of course, impacting our sector. And it will be interesting to see where that goes with new innovations. But what I will say to that is all of these new technologies and new approaches cost money. And when we see that rising input costs are one of the top concerns for employers, I just think we need to factor that in, right? They've got a lot of capital investments in the current equipment that they have. And also, I think it will have a skills impact, what skills we need with these new innovations moving forward, and what those roles will look like, and ensuring the industry is equipped with the proper training for that. You also raised an issue around upskilling. We're certainly seeing that within our sector. We have with some of the programs we've had over the last year where we have been able to cover the cost of driver training. There have been a lot of frontline workers, right? Like, so those workers that don't have higher levels of education, but certainly getting a commercial driver's license could give them a role where they're making more money. So we've seen a lot of people transition into driving roles and other roles within the business. It certainly remains a focus.
Yeah, I would just make one comment about the capacity of a small business to integrate new people. And, you know, this whole notion of learn as you go, or a training program, or a, you know, apprenticing, or however you want to look at it, it almost becomes impossible when you are short-staffed to begin with. You bring on new talent and there's no one to babysit them. There's no one to look after them. There's no one to, you either got to just, you know, learn by baptism by fire, or you leave and you leave. And in a lot of cases, this is the actual feedback you receive, is that they weren't ready, they didn't know what they were doing, they couldn't. And it's really not the case. It's just the fact that a small business is run with less hands, and each person has a real contribution on a day-to-day basis that cannot be interrupted for a period of time to teach someone what they need to know. So the upskilling, the training, the investment required to do all of this, and it is something that needs to be addressed for this sector in a big way. Now, the sector itself also has to, as I noted earlier, kind of evolve. They have to turn into a destination for a candidate and be ready and know what they need and become that attractive destination for a candidate. But at the end of the day, it's far more challenging in a small environment to really get someone up to speed than it is in a large company. And that's why a lot of people gravitate to large companies. They just know they're going to get better experience in terms of their overall employment.
Thank you very much. Angela, you mentioned questions in the chat, and I'm reading them right now. And one concerns trucking very specifically. And I'm intrigued by the dynamics there. I think Simon mentioned them as well. We still seem to have shortages, maybe less than before because of the slowing economy, if I understand well the dynamic. But one question is, what is really the extent of shortages as new drivers, apparently, a number of them anyway, are finding it difficult to find work?
There's always a bit of that mismatch. We have a range of issues, I would say, that impact that. We hear a lot around insurance, just needing that experience for drivers to get in. And it's that lower level of experience has some impacts. And I think too, it's where they're looking for work. There's certainly many opportunities, and we've been very successful at connecting those workers to more of those opportunities coming in. So the vacancies are real, right? There's still not enough well-trained drivers that we need behind the wheel. So when we look at those training issues, it remains a real issue within our sector. They need to have that good training at the entry level, but then it's also those employers that make the investment of training them at the occupational level. That's even more important, because when they've gone through their initial training, they're still not fully equipped to drive a 53-foot trailer down the highway. They need additional on-the-job training, and it is more challenging for those smaller and medium-sized businesses to make those training investments, and we need those in order to keep building up that trained, skilled workforce.
Thank you very much. Now, smaller businesses are squeezed. We heard from Simon, it's a tough environment still. Yet, what we see in the economy writ large is that wages are starting to catch up and exceed now the rate of inflation. So real wages are starting to rise. And naturally, one of the Stephen mentioned, well, one option is to try to get the right worker from get them to move from their current position. How do you navigate this? What I see anyway in the economy is a push for higher wages, and if companies were able to pay them, would that not induce or encourage more people to train, get into the labor force? Any comments on the wage situation and whether that's a way for companies to attract talent? Obviously it is, but in the current environment. Simon.
I would say that small businesses, medium-sized businesses operate in a competitive environment. They've always been operating in a competitive environment, and so they do make efforts and try to keep their to stay competitive on the labor market. And wages play a big role in making sure that businesses can remain competitive. I think Stephen also earlier rightly pointed out that it's a package. It's not just It's not just wages, it's what you can offer. Small, medium-sized businesses can also offer an interesting work environment for some people who are looking for something that is more small scale, where they can gain an experience quickly and obtain new responsibilities. So there are different ways in which small businesses can position themselves in a competitive market. But that being said, wages are going up. There are some healthy wage adjustments that are being planned by small businesses. That's something we track actually every month in our business barometer survey, and we can see that wage increase plans for the next 12 months. Although they're like prices, they've been trending down. They've definitely peaked at the beginning of the inflation period that we've witnessed in the past couple of years, but they remain above historical average at the moment. It will have a limited impact in terms of, like some people tend probably to see it as a silver bullet again, and I would say it will have a limited impact if there are no candidates to incentivize whatsoever in the beginning. So that's also something we found out in one of our past research reports. We've asked our members if they had tried to increase wages to solve their labor shortages, and that's a lot of our members told us they had tried this and it didn't really help. And the feedback that we got in the comments from our survey was that there was no candidate in the first place. You don't even post a salary range on your job offer, but there's no candidates, and that's the situation unfortunately we've been operating in for quite a few years. But now things evolve, and I expect small businesses to keep making important investment on that side, but also to invest and position themselves on other aspects too, putting forward the unique work experience that they can provide to Canadian workers.
Can I jump in on one thing? Sorry, Angela, just that there was a question raised as well about the factors that inhibit the raising of wages, meaning that if the shortages are costly, how do you balance that? And sorry, something just happened to my screen there. And so in one hand, you have the need for the people, and on the other hand, can we afford to put these people in? I think fundamentally, a lot of small businesses are not financially set up to have a foresight or a proactive approach. Perhaps it's a monetary issue where they only have so much money and they run on a very tight, limited cash flow. And fundamentally, if they were to address that and kind of look at the future of what the business could do, I think financing and banking and all of these other aspects of a small business are sometimes ignored and not the priority in terms of how you grow your business. And that affects what you can and cannot do people-wise. The other thing I think on that, the trade-off is that it's difficult to bring someone in at a more high level when everyone else is only making X, and you want to play that person X plus Y. The parity issue becomes a problem. So there are a number of factors that just don't affect larger institutions or larger organizations who are more equipped cash flow wise and financially structured in a way that allows for them to make investment hires. And I think that's really the key term here, is an investment hire. And small business typically is more reactive. And to your point as well, Simon, it's like small business needs to wake up to the fact that there are good people working, not necessarily in the trucking side, Angela, but in other parts, and you just got to get them to come from another company to yours. And that's about having your story straight.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in our sector. Like, compensation is always a top concern, a top issue. But what we see, particularly with our truck drivers, it's not necessarily what they're being paid, it's how they're being paid. Once pay becomes more transparent, we're seeing a higher retention. So there's the newer generation of workers want to know exactly what they're going to take home at the end of the month. We have an older generation of workers that are really comfortable with a hybrid model of hourly pay and mileage pay. But when that transparency happens, then when workers are looking and shopping around, they can compare apples to apples when they know exactly what they're being paid.
That's just a very, very interesting. And in terms of the training support, I mean, there's two things here that I heard. We may be a bit more constrained in terms of the new population, and that's a debate, immigrants, temporary or otherwise, and that's a debate that we're having, but we still, I think, are taking in high number. So then there's a question of underutilization of our existing skills. Angela, you mentioned women in trucking, just attracting people who may not be considering careers in certain sectors, underutilization of immigrants, and then finally, I guess, until we get to the higher wages question, there's the training. So what is, I know there's no silver bullet, but in terms of these solutions, where would you think your members would see them, in order? More people, between more people and higher wages, is it more training, bringing the underutilized population in the workforce? Where would you see the more bang for the buck? And how do we incent more training?
That's a big question.
Those are big questions, right?
Yeah, simply put it from my point of view is the academic avenue is too slow. It just can't turn quick enough to address what is currently an issue. It's not like it's a future issue. It's now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we need stronger policy related to immigrants coming to allow them to work in their function or in their profession in a more accelerated manner, which then ties back a little bit to education academic side, but maybe there's some avenue there. And then the third thing really is about investment in retraining, but in things that are relevant now. The problem with the retraining is that it's always a couple of years behind cycle, maybe even longer than that. So by the time we actually legislate or get some sort of a program in place, it's not really addressing what is the pressing issue of the day. So that's a very challenging component of allocating money to problems that are sometimes a little less intense than they were when the program was originally designed or envisioned.
And that speaks to how we plan. Angela.
Sure, I can look at this from two angles. So first is driver training is always a challenge within our sector, getting the cost of training covered. It can cost up to $10,000, and it's a barrier for many people. We know that because there's limited funds available or limited programs available to help cover that cost. The Canada Job Grant has traditionally been the only avenue. So we've had incentivized programs that cover that cost of training, which has been helpful in bringing in more women, bringing in young people in particular, right? Because that's a barrier for that market. For those higher skilled roles, we've been really successful with the student work placement program. So through this program, we're able to bring in college and university students for co-op placements, work integrated learning, and that's enabled us to expose all of these other occupations to the educational institutions themselves that don't necessarily think of trucking and logistics. We went into that program thinking we're going to tap into the college students. That's our market. Of the 1,000+ students we've placed, the majority have actually come from university programs, which I think speaks to those skilled occupations that we need, and we need more of those partnerships to keep that talent coming in.
Thank you. Simon, le mot de la fin est à vous.
Merci. I like that Angela just mentioned the work integrated learning programs. I believe that everything that will help us sort of address those mismatches that we're seeing, whether it's in our education training system or immigration system. I think it's probably the big area for improvement in the next few years. We can't afford to miss on that. I think one message we've consistently heard from small business owners is that they find it hard to find the talent that they really need, and when they see the candidates that they have access to and their needs, it's just sometimes hard to bridge that gap. So working on that, I think, could really be a big change for small businesses, and a big way in which we can modernize our immigration system and modernize our education system for the challenges of the next decade and the decade after that.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the participants for their questions. I've tried to summarize them as best as possible. There were a number of them. I'd like to thank our panelists today, Simon Gaudreault, CFIB, Angela Splinter of Trucking HR, Stephen Mill, Robert Half, for their very rich presentation and answers to the questions. I learned a lot. I believe everyone on this call has, so thank you very much again. Thanks to our members for supporting our work, without whom we couldn't put together these events and the associated research. And thank you especially today to Trucking HR and Angela Splinter for their support, generous support for this event. We are adjourned. Please watch our website for future webinars, and of course we welcome your topic suggestions in that respect. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.